Landon Tate sat in his office, staring at reports that didn't add up. Customer complaints were rising. Employee turnover was at an all-time high. And yet, according to his district managers, everything was under control. He wasn't buying it. He had built this restaurant chain from the ground up, 11 locations, all thriving at one point. But lately, something was off, and he hated relying on second-hand reports. He needed to see the truth for himself. The plan was simple. Disguise himself as a new trainee and work in one of the busiest locations. This particular restaurant had the highest complaints, mostly about rude staff and slow service. If there was a problem, he was going to find it. Landon changed everything about his appearance. His usual neatly styled brown hair was now covered by a cheap baseball cap. He grew out his stubble, wore thick-rimmed glasses, and dressed in the same uniform as the other workers. No one at this location had ever met him in person. He'd only dealt with managers through emails and calls. It was perfect. Walking into the restaurant, he immediately felt the tension in the air. Employees moved quickly, but there was no energy, no teamwork. The manager, a tall, balding man named Greg, barely looked up from his phone when Landon introduced himself as Luke, the new trainee. Yeah, just follow someone around. Don't mess anything up, Greg muttered, waving him off. That was it? No proper introduction, no guidance? Landon clenched his jaw but kept his cool. He wasn't here to argue, he was here to learn. A young waitress with auburn hair and a tired but kind smile approached him. Hey, I'm Josie Carter. You're the new guy. Yeah, Luke, he said, shaking her hand. Well, Greg isn't gonna help you, so stick with me. I'll show you how things actually work around here. Josie was patient and thorough, explaining how to take orders, handle difficult customers, and manage the rush. She was good, really good. But as she worked, Landon noticed something troubling. The staff was stretched way too thin. Josie was handling almost every table while Greg stayed in the back on his phone. The kitchen was overwhelmed with only 2 cooks handling what should have been a 4-person job. Orders were piling up and customers were growing frustrated. Then it got worse. A man in a suit, clearly irritated, waved Josie over. I've been waiting for 20 minutes for my food. What's the hold up? Josie stayed calm. I'm so sorry, sir. We're a little short-staffed today, but I'll check on your order right now. Greg, overhearing the complaint, finally looked up. Instead of helping, he stormed over. Josie, quit making excuses. If you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't be working here. Landon's blood boiled. Josie was doing everything she could while Greg had done nothing but sit around. But Josie didn't back down. With all due respect, Greg, we need more people on the floor. If we had more staff, we wouldn't be in this mess. Greg glared at her. If you don't like how I run things, you can leave. Josie took a deep breath, clearly holding back frustration. I need this job, Greg. But I also need to do it right. Landon saw it coming before it happened. You know what? You're done. Fired. Get out. Josie's face paled. Are you serious? Greg crossed his arms. Dead serious. Hand over your apron and go. Landon couldn't stay quiet anymore. He had seen enough. Landon had seen enough. The way Greg dismissed Josie without hesitation, without considering the reality of the understaffing issue, made his stomach tighten. He forced himself to stay in character, though every instinct told him to step in right then and there. Instead, he watched, gauging the reactions of the other employees. The kitchen staff exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. A busboy hesitated, clearly wanting to say something, but he pressed his lips together and focused on stacking plates. The tension in the restaurant was suffocating. Josie, visibly shaken but refusing to let it show, untied her apron and set it on the counter. She looked Greg in the eye, her expression firm. There was no begging, no pleading, just quiet disbelief. You're making a mistake, she said. Greg scoffed. No, I'm making a decision. Now get out. Landon caught the way Josie's hands curled into fists, the way her shoulders squared as if she was holding back a storm of emotions. She turned without another word and walked toward the back to grab her things. Landon took a slow breath, steadying himself. He couldn't blow his cover now. Not yet. He needed more. Greg turned his attention to the remaining staff. Anyone else got a problem with how I run things? His tone was mocking, daring someone to challenge him. No one answered. Landon gritted his teeth. He had built this place on values: hard work, respect, teamwork. This was a dictatorship. Greg exhaled sharply and clapped his hands together. All right, back to work. We're already behind because of Josie dragging her feet. That was it. No concern about the extra workload. No plan to cover her absence. Just blame and dismissal. Landon forced himself to move to blend in. He grabbed a tray and followed one of the other servers, pretending to focus on the job. Inside, his mind was racing. Josie didn't deserve this. She had been the only one truly helping him, guiding him through the chaos. She had held this place together despite management making it nearly impossible. And now she was gone just like that. The next hour was chaos. Without Josie, the workload doubled for everyone else. Orders were delayed even further, and customers grew more frustrated. Greg, of course, did nothing. At one point, Landon saw him step outside for a smoke break while the rest of them scrambled to keep the place running. Landon moved quickly, doing his best to pick up the slack. He took orders, cleared tables, and even ran food when the kitchen was backed up. The other servers, exhausted and irritated, barely acknowledged him. They were in survival mode. At the drink station, a server with short black hair and dark circles under his eyes muttered under his breath. Unbelievable. Landon glanced at him. What? The server sighed, rubbing his temples. Josie was the only one who actually cared. She covered for so many of us when we were swamped. And Greg? He just tosses her out like she's nothing. Landon nodded slowly. Does this happen a lot? The server hesitated, then nodded. Greg's got a temper. If you push back, you're gone. Nobody says anything because we all need the job. But we're all miserable. Landon could see it. The exhaustion, the frustration. This wasn't just a bad night, this was the norm. His hands curled into fists at his sides. This wasn't the company he built. By the time the dinner rush slowed, the restaurant was barely holding together. A few customers had left angry, some had complained, and Greg? He had disappeared into the office, leaving the rest of them to deal with the mess. Landon knew what he had to do. He untied his apron, set it on the counter, and walked toward the back. Greg was in his office, feet up on the desk, scrolling through his phone without a care in the world. Landon knocked once. Greg barely glanced up. What? Landon stepped inside and shut the door behind him. Then he took off his hat and glasses. Greg frowned. What the hell are you? Landon met his eyes. I'm Landon Tate. Greg's face drained of color. His phone slipped slightly in his grip. What? Landon stepped closer, his voice low and controlled. I own this company. And I just spent the last few hours watching you destroy everything I built. Greg stared, his posture stiffening as realization set in. His grip tightened around his phone as if holding onto something tangible would ground him. The confidence he had exuded all evening, the dismissiveness, the arrogance began to crack. Landon didn't give him a chance to recover. You've been running this place into the ground, he said, voice even but sharp. And I just watched it happen firsthand. Greg opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted toward the door as if calculating how much damage control he could do. He started, but Landon didn't let him continue. You fired one of the best workers in this restaurant for telling you the truth, Landon pressed on. You ignored the chaos out there, left your staff drowning, and instead of stepping in, you sat back and did nothing. Greg's jaw tightened. I was handling things the way I saw fit. That's the problem, Landon said. You think handling things means sitting in an office while your employees struggle. You think leadership is about intimidation instead of support. Greg's breathing was uneven now, his hands clenching and unclenching on the desk. Look, I didn't know who you were. If I had. Landon didn't let him finish. It shouldn't have mattered. You should be treating every employee with respect, whether I'm watching or not. Greg's face flushed. Okay. Maybe I was a little harsh, but Josie had an attitude. Landon's expression didn't waver. No, she had integrity. Something you clearly lack. The room was silent except for the muffled sounds of the restaurant outside. Greg shifted in his chair, his knee bouncing. Are you firing me? He asked finally, his voice quieter now. Landon took a breath, his decision already made. You're done here. Greg exhaled sharply through his nose, his jaw set. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to say. He pushed back his chair abruptly, standing so fast it scraped against the floor. Without another word, he grabbed his things and left, the door swinging shut behind him. Landon stood still for a moment, grounding himself. Then he headed back to the floor. The employees were still working, still pushing through the night despite being short-staffed. A few of them noticed him return, their brows furrowing at his changed appearance. The server he had spoken to earlier, the one who had muttered about Greg, was staring, realization dawning. Landon stepped into the center of the room. "Can I have everyone's attention?" he said, his voice carrying over the low hum of conversation. Slowly, the staff stopped what they were doing. "I'm Landon Tate. I own this restaurant." The reaction was immediate. Some employees froze mid-task, others exchanged glances, confusion and shock rippling through the group. "I came here undercover to see what was really happening," Landon continued, "because I wasn't getting the truth from management." He let his gaze sweep over the employees. "I saw how hard you all work. I saw how you carry this place without the support you deserve." A few employees nodded subtly, as if they'd been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. "Greg is gone," Landon said firmly, effective immediately. A wave of quiet relief passed through the group. No one cheered, no one made a scene, but the tension in the air shifted. "But that's not enough," Landon went on. "This place needs change. And it starts now." He turned to the exhausted kitchen staff. "You're getting the extra hands you need. We're hiring immediately." Then to the servers. "You should never be put in a position where you're expected to do the work of 3 people. That ends today." Finally, he met the eyes of the employees who had been afraid to speak up. "And from now on, if you have a problem, if you see something wrong, you come straight to me." A quiet beat passed before someone spoke. "What about Josie?" It was the busboy, his voice hesitant but hopeful. Landon nodded. "I'm calling her tonight. She's getting her job back if she wants it. And if she doesn't, I'll make sure she lands somewhere better." A few employees exhaled, their shoulders finally relaxing. Landon let the moment settle before adding, "But I don't want to just fix what's broken. I want to make this a place you actually want to work." For the first time that night, something shifted in the employees' expressions. It wasn't just relief, it was the smallest glimmer of hope. Landon knew there was still a lot of work to do. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was back where he belonged. Landon wasted no time. The moment he stepped outside, he pulled out his phone and called Josie. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice cautious. He could hear the wind in the background, like she was walking somewhere. "Hey, it's Landon Tate." There was a pause. "Wait, what?" "I own the restaurant. I was undercover tonight." He didn't sugarcoat it. "Greg fired you, and that never should have happened." Silence stretched between them. "Are you serious?" she finally said. "Yeah, I just let him go." Another pause. "You fired Greg?" "Effective immediately." A shaky breath came through the line. "Wow." Landon could hear the weight in that single word. He imagined her standing on a sidewalk somewhere, replaying the night in her head, trying to make sense of everything. "I want you to come back," he said. "If you're willing." She didn't answer right away. "Look, I get it if you don't want to," he continued. "The way things were run before, it wasn't fair to you. But I'm fixing it. Hiring more staff, making sure no one gets left out to dry again. And if you do come back, I want to talk about moving you up." That got her attention. "Moving me up?" "You didn't just do your job tonight," Landon said. "You led. You trained me when no one else cared, and you stood up for the staff when management failed them. That's what this place needs." Josie let out a short laugh, but there was disbelief in it. "I got fired for pushing back, and now you want to promote me?" "Yeah," Landon said simply. She was quiet for a few seconds. "You're serious about fixing this place?" "Dead serious." She exhaled. "All right, I'll come back. But if things don't actually change, I won't stay." "That's fair," he said. "See you tomorrow?" "Yeah." When he hung up, something settled in his chest. The weight of the night was still there, but for the first time, it felt like things were moving in the right direction. The next morning, he arrived before anyone else. The place was quiet, the kind of stillness that only existed before a restaurant came to life for the day. He walked through the space, seeing it with new eyes. The worn-down staff, the broken leadership, the exhaustion in every shift, it was all fixable. By the time the morning crew arrived, word had already spread. Greg was gone. Josie was coming back, and changes were happening. Landon gathered everyone before the restaurant opened. Some employees still looked wary, like they were waiting for the catch. Others seemed cautiously optimistic. "I won't waste your time," he said. "We're hiring more people immediately. No more running shifts understaffed. No more expecting you to do the impossible." A few nods. Some employees crossed their arms, waiting. "Josie is coming back," he continued, "and she's moving into management." The reaction was subtle, a few glances exchanged. A couple of lifted brows, but no one protested. "She's one of the best people here," Landon said, "and I need leaders who actually care about this place." Josie arrived a few minutes later. She stepped inside, her expression guarded. But when she saw the staff looking at her not with pity, but with something like respect, her shoulders loosened. Landon met her gaze and nodded. "Welcome back." She nodded back. "Let's get to work." And just like that, the restaurant started to feel different. The tension that had weighed down every shift began to lift. Employees worked knowing they had support. Landon didn't just step back into his corporate office. He stayed involved. He checked in, listened, and made sure the promises he made weren't just words. A few weeks later, the complaints had dropped. Turnover slowed. Customers noticed the change. Too, the service was sharper, the energy in the restaurant better. One afternoon, Landon watched from a corner as Josie handled a small rush with ease. She gave clear direction, jumped in when needed, and treated the staff with the kind of respect that had been missing before. She caught him watching and walked over. "You sticking around, or are you going undercover again?" she asked. Landon chuckled. "I think I've had enough undercover work for a while." She nodded, then hesitated. "I'll be honest. I wasn't sure if you'd actually follow through on everything." "I get that," he said, "but I meant it. This place needed to change." And it did. She glanced around the restaurant, watching the staff move with confidence, the customers seated without frustration. "Yeah, it did." Landon looked at her. "You ever think of running your own place someday?" Josie blinked. "What?" "You've got leadership in you. I see it." "You ever consider it?" She processed that for a moment, then gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Maybe." Landon smiled. "Well, when you're ready, let me know." She shook her head, but there was a glint of something in her expression, not disbelief, but possibility. Landon stepped back, letting her take control of the shift. He had come in undercover to find the truth. Instead, he had found something better. A leader in the making. Landon spent the next few weeks ensuring every planned change actually took effect. It wasn't enough to remove Greg, there had to be a complete shift in how the restaurant operated. More employees were hired, schedules were adjusted to ensure no one was overworked, and a new training program was put in place to prevent the kind of chaos he had witnessed. Josie adapted to her new role quickly. She didn't hesitate to address problems as they arose, stepping in where needed without hesitation. Despite the initial skepticism from some of the staff, her leadership quickly earned their trust. She balanced firmness with fairness, making sure expectations were clear while also ensuring the team felt supported. One evening, Landon stopped by unannounced, slipping into a corner booth to observe. The difference was night and day. Orders moved efficiently, the kitchen staff worked in sync, and the energy in the restaurant felt lighter. Employees weren't dragging themselves through shifts anymore, they moved with a sense of purpose. A server passed by, balancing a tray of drinks. He caught sight of Landon and gave a short nod before continuing to his table. That was another shift before. Employees had either been too exhausted or too wary of management to acknowledge his presence. Now, there was a level of mutual respect. Josie noticed him a few minutes later. She walked over, wiping her hands on a small notepad she kept tucked into her apron. She didn't hesitate to sit across from him, leaning forward slightly. "I know you're not just here for the food," she said. Landon let out a short chuckle. "Guilty." She glanced around the restaurant before looking back at him. "It's different now. Feels like a real team." He nodded. "That's because of you." She considered that for a moment before shaking her head slightly. "It's because of all of us. I just helped steer things in the right direction." He respected that answer. "Has anything else come up?" he asked, wanting to make sure there weren't lingering issues. Josie exhaled, thinking. Nothing major. A few of the newer hires needed some extra training, but they're catching on. The biggest thing is just keeping the momentum going. It's easy to change things at first, but if we don't keep reinforcing the new standard, it'll slip back to how it was. That was exactly what he wanted to hear. She wasn't just reacting to problems, she was thinking about the long term. Landon studied her, debating something. Then, he decided there was no point in waiting. "I want to talk about your future here," he said. She arched an eyebrow. "You already gave me the promotion." "This isn't about that," he clarified. "I see potential in you. Real leadership potential. And I don't believe in letting talent go to waste." She tilted her head slightly, waiting for him to continue. "I want you to start thinking about what's next," he said. "Not just running shifts here, but maybe managing one of the other locations eventually. Or even more than that." For the first time since they started this conversation, she looked genuinely surprised. "You think I could do that?" "I know you can," she exhaled, sitting back. "That's a lot to think about." "I'm not expecting an answer right now," Landon said. "But I want you to consider it. This place wouldn't have turned around without you. And I think you're capable of a lot more." She drummed her fingers on the table absently, clearly turning the idea over in her mind. "I appreciate that," she said finally. "I just don't want to get ahead of myself. I just got used to this role." "That's fair," he acknowledged. "But when you're ready, let me know." She nodded, then glanced toward the kitchen. "I should get back to it." Landon stood as well. "I'll check in again soon." As Josie walked back to the floor, he watched the way employees naturally gravitated toward her for guidance. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was leading by example. He had come here weeks ago expecting to find problems. Instead, he had found someone who could help shape the future of the company. And he wasn't about to let that go to waste.